As I mentioned in other video, Figma is really the tool that I'm using on a daily basis for my UX design and research role. And in this video, I wanted to talk about Figma plugin. So plugins are add-ons you can add to your Figma to speed up your workflow. So today I'm going to go through the plugins that I'm using more frequently and that I find really invaluable. If you have already downloaded Figma and you're familiar with it, highly recommend that as you follow along with this video, you check out the plugins yourself and you can learn how to play around with it. I'm sure this will be very valuable and easier to learn them. The first thing that I'm going to show is how to find where to download the plugins. If you go into your home screen of your Figma and you go into the community section, this is where you can type the names of the plugins. For example, let's say Data Advisor. Click on plugins. First, I will start with the plugins that I'm using the most often. Here you see I have a frame and I would like to check if the contrast between mostly the font and the background is enough so that for people who have vision disabilities, it's comfortable for the eyes. So I'm going to select my frame. And the two plugins that I'm using for that are A11Y, the color contrast checker, and Able. So the color contrast checker lets you select the entire frame like I just did, and then I will click on check, and then it will tell me all the places where the contrast is not big enough. So here I see that, let's say, healthcare and teens seems to be a little bit too light. So let me change it to, for example, black. And I will select the frame again and check it again. And now you will see that, oh, now it is solved. The contrast is high enough. So you can play around, especially if you are choosing a new color palette. This is very useful to try to see how you can optimally choose your colors to make sure that the contrast is big enough. The color contrast, the other color contrast checker, friction-free accessibility, is a little bit different because you need to select two layers and it will tell you if the contrast is big enough. So here for my button, if I want to see if the contrast is big enough, I would select the background and the text. And oh, it tells me that for large text and small text, I'm all good. So they work a little bit differently. Sometimes I like to use the first one, the contrast checker first, to do like a first screening. But if I only have one layer I want to check, then I will use the friction-free accessibility. The other two that I'm using really frequently that are a little bit similar are for content. I will often use Unsplash for any sort of pictures. Sometimes you need like a picture for background or profile pictures, and Unsplash has a lot of options. So let's say here I have a profile picture and I'd like to change it. I will go to Unsplash and it lets me select a category. So let's say I want to choose portrait because I'm doing a profile picture. I'll click on this and it will change it. So I can select different things. So that's really interesting if you quickly need an image and you don't feel like, going to download onto another website. That's very useful. And then the other really helpful plugins that I'm using super frequently is Content Reel. So Content Reel is a little bit similar. Again, if I do need to change my profile picture avatar, I can select here avatar. It will automatically change it. But then it also has US phone numbers, currencies, date, and also addresses. Sometimes that's very helpful. Instead of having to come up with like a US address, you can just select the text over here and then US full address, and automatically it will enter an address. So that's really nice because also it will reproduce the same font that you're already using, so you don't have to adjust anything. Another really interesting thing is lorem ipsum. Sometimes you need that, especially if you're doing low fidelity wireframe, so that's very nice to not have to go on the lorem ipsum generator and have to go back and forth. So really love that plugin. It's very super. Two other plugins that I'm using very frequently are for everything icons. So again, going into plugins, I use Iconify and Iconscout. So what I find really nice about Iconify is that, let's say, apparently recently I needed a down arrow. So, this is pretty generic. I'm not necessarily going to spend the time, designing a new down arrow for what I needed to say like download, for example. So I have my down arrow here, and what's really interesting with Iconify is that I can change the picture, the color of it, whatever color I want to have. So that's really interesting for that, and they have tons of selections. So everything like generic that you need, I highly recommend you check it out. And then if we look at Iconscout, it's a little bit different. It has a lot of options. Again, some of them are paid, some of them are free, so it might be worth it to select, free. But a little bit of a disadvantage that I found with this one, let's say if I search the same thing, down arrow, is that you cannot change the color of it because it's more of a form of an image. So that can be useful if you're looking for a logo of a company that's really well known or something like that. But sometimes when it's for an icon and I need to change the color, that's a little bit more of an inconvenience. Another plugin that I really love and I discovered recently more for product planning is Product Planner. If you are doing UX work or any form of product planning, this is hugely useful because they have a lot of templates, for example, for assumption grid, for product roadmap. Sometimes it's nice to keep everything centralized into a same document, into a Figma document. They have a lot of different UX tools, workflow charts. So I highly recommend that you check it out and look for different UX tools because it can be really helpful and save you a lot of time rather than having to, do it yourself. Another plugin that I'm using very frequently is Autoflow. I spent time before, doing something like this, trying to put arrows in between frames. I was drawing them manually in Figma. So Autoflow is really nice because it allows you to, if you select Autoflow, you will simply select the two frames that you want to draw connections to, holding Shift, and there you go, it will draw an arrow. It's very simple, but at the same time, I find it really useful. I also do prototypes, but sometimes with my development team, they like when I can simply show the interactions by putting arrows, so I find Autoflow very useful for that. So plugins that I really enjoy, but I'm using less often. One of them for rapid wireframing, especially for low fidelity wireframing, the plugins called Wireframe is very useful because sometimes there are some more generic things that you might want to use. For example, let's say on the web, I want to look into login and sign up. It will give me a lot of different frames that I can really easily use that are more generic, and it really allows you when you're doing like early ideation with your team, especially remotely, to quickly, select and add different pieces of, things that are part of login, sign up. You should definitely explore everything that it has to offer, but I found that really helpful. Another plugin that I'm using frequently is called Rename It. So here I copied 3 times the same frame, and you see that they're all named the same, so it's not really ideal. So let's say that I'm selecting all of these frames and I'm hoping to rename them. I'm going to plugins and rename it, rename selected layers. And there you have it. I have my selected layers. I can create a sequence, like layer name with the number in the sequence, descending sequence, and it will all rename everything. So that's very useful, speeding up the workflow. Alright folks, so that's it for me in terms of the Figma plugins that really help me speed up my workflow and that I use the most often. Would love to know what you guys think and what kind of plugins you are using, so don't hesitate to leave it in the comments below. And if you are interested into having more contents like this, then don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and see you all into another video. Bye.